Welcome to Realist Revolution USA. This is the podcast for real patriots who care about real America. I am Kim, one of your resident realists, and with me is my co-host, your other resident realist, Macklin. Macklin, thanks for being here.
As always, Kim.
Today, we're going to get real about libraries and book bans. So, two pretty mildly hot topic things. So I'm pretty excited. We have a great guest with us today. Her name is Amy. She is a librarian herself, and we're pretty excited to have you, Amy. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you so
Welcome.
much, Kim and Macklin. Thank you.
So, kind of kick it off, Amy. Do you want to give us a little bit of introduction about yourself and,
Sure.
How did you get into being a librarian? Just tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I have been the director of a small rural public library for 21 years. And small and rural, meaning a town, New England town of around 3,000 people. And how did I get into being a librarian? It was kind of, my educational background is actually international studies. So it's kind of funny that I ended up being the librarian in the town where I grew up. But I had kids and we started coming here to story time. And then I started volunteering. And then a position opened up as an assistant director. And then the director was getting her degree in and become a therapist. So I applied for that job and it just kind of evolved that way. But I should also mention my mom back in the 70s and 80s and her friends were taking classes on astrology and doing charts. And they did my chart and they told me that one of the career choices that would be good, according to my astrological chart, was being a librarian. And I remember at the time being kind of offended by that. I was like, I will never be a librarian. But maybe it was just, written in the stars.
It's meant to be.
Wow.
Meant to be.
Your
I don't know.
international background combined with your career is the perfect manifestation of think global, act local.
I think about that saying all the time, and more recently now than ever, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things you just mentioned, Amy, is that you kind of started getting into going to the library yourself as a kid. What are some of the things that people tend to forget that public libraries offer? So like you mentioned, like story times, like child activities, there's community building involved with libraries.
Sure, there's
what are
a
kind
ton.
of other options?
Every library, this is kind of the beauty of public libraries in our country. And that is, you will not walk into a public library anywhere and have the same cookie cutter that you will somewhere else. And it's because we, as naturally as we can, adapt and change to meet the needs of our community. I can't tell you over the past 20 years how many times I've heard someone say, oh no, ebooks, it's the end of libraries as we know it, or computers, it's the end of libraries as whatever it is. But we adapt and change to meet the needs of our community. So here we have snowshoes and cake pans and moisture meter and all kinds of things that people can borrow that are not just books. I had somebody just last week say, I love coming here. It's never just about the books. It's about that sense of community too. Downloadable audio and ebooks. We have programs for all ages and interests.
That's awesome. So you guys do, I know like our public library where I live has like DVDs and movies, music, not to mention, least of all, internet access that I believe anybody can connect to. So
and let's get
that's a
real
community
about
service.
that. Yeah, right now, Kim, the FCC chairperson I just was reading about has just decided to end the E-rate program where there's funding to libraries. We don't, and the library where I work doesn't get E-rate, but to restrict Wi-Fi funding for libraries so that I don't know what the motivation behind it is. Maybe that people can't, when the library is closed, access that free Wi-Fi. I don't know what that motivation is, but yeah, free Wi-Fi in some libraries around the country, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Like, I believe that Wi-Fi should be a free public utility, so the libraries that offer it are a bridge between what we currently have and making that a reality. Because yeah, like not everyone has internet access, not everyone has high-speed internet access. Even something as simple as a printer, if you're trying to print out a resume to apply for a job, that can be an impediment if you don't have these resources in your community.
Yeah, and actually, even speaking of that, Macklin, a lot of job applications are online.
Mm.
Or so even just uploading your resume to an online platform to be able to that if you don't have a computer, printer, access to the internet, you might be missing out on job opportunities.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which
that's
is
true.
huge, especially right now.
Hmm.
Everybody is looking for work. If they don't have it, people are struggling. And I think people forget that these are things that libraries offer.
Yeah.
So it's super important to me. Like I grew up like you going to the library. Like I would go research there. I would hit up the microfiche. That's probably like makes me seem really old. Love a good deep dive into the microfiche. So yeah, it's just super important for people to have access. And
Yeah.
I think that's forgotten a lot that libraries offer this connection to the world and the rest of the country and even your local community if you're trying to get a job.
Hmm.
My local library has some kind of, I have not looked into it, but they offer some kind of a subscription that they pay for that they offer to the community that is through, I think it's Ancestry or it's 23andMe. And they
Hmm.
have a genealogy program that
Yeah.
the city subsidizes that you can go and participate in, which I think is another thing that probably the average person doesn't think about when they think
Yeah, we
about
had a lot of
the
people who do
library.
genealogy research at the library. That's a good point. I mean, honestly, I could probably just talk about what libraries do the whole time. The whole time. It is pretty.
That is so cool. I
Hmm.
think about too just all the things that they offer. It pops into my mind. So was it last year when the big eclipse, the solar eclipse happened?
Yeah.
Our our city is right in the path of where it was going to be not complete blackout, but basically total blackout. And one of the things that our library did was they got a whole bunch of the glasses and they had like a big solar eclipse watching party. Like they took, had kids, families coming down and watching it there. So it's such a huge thing that, they offer all sorts of things that you wouldn't even necessarily think of.
Right. And in our rural community, people who have gardens, there's a lot of libraries in our area who have seed gardens. So our
Ooh,
seed libraries where you can, you only use a few seeds to plant your tomatoes. You give the rest to the library this little drawer, and then somebody else can come in and get the rest of the tomato seeds. So like a seed swap or a seed library.
that's amazing.
Hmm.
Those community building moments, whether it's gardening or an eclipse, are so important because we are increasingly having our own unique experiences as digital media consumes our lives and social media. We have these shared experiences. I feel like they're becoming more and more rare. And so when you do have these shared experiences, it reminds you of who your neighbors are and who your friends are and who you can count on that are maybe a stone's throw away that you otherwise might not be in your daily or weekly bubble. And the library can facilitate that as well.
Sure. I love it when neighbors are both in the library at the same time and they start talking to each other about their neighborly things. I love it. It fuels me. I love it.
Speaking of people coming in, as a librarian in the
Mhm.
library, like how involved are you with helping users in the library? Do people ask for help often? Like, do you get a wide range? Some people are very standoffish, others are right up in your face.
Yep. Both. Yes. Yeah.
Nice.
Um, Particularly, I would say that folks need help using the internet, and we were talking about job searching, but also our state switched to online reporting for unemployment, and that was a huge transition for a lot of people. So we were helping a lot of people file their, just little things like that, just sort of computer and internet help. Something else is we really try to help people not just use the internet, but also find accurate sources for those information. And that's a huge challenge right now. But that's something else that we're really making that a focus right now, actually, in this library that I work in.
That's fantastic. I
Hmm.
feel like I know that there are, I don't know if it's so much parts of our country, but I know there are courses in other countries in the world where they teach them how to determine what is
Oh
misinformation,
yeah,
what is fact, and
mhm.
what kind of sources are reliable and which ones aren't, which I know, like, when I was younger, like, my generation was the first generation to really get into, having the internet available to us readily. And that was something, even then, it was like Wikipedia is not a reliable, source.
Right,
Like, you need
right.
to have
And
something
not
a bit
just that, but
more.
just we're actually hosting a program later this month, separating the news from the chaff. What is real and what isn't real, and how to really discover what that looks like. And I do think that schools teach these things, but I also think that it's not required. So I know a lot of school librarians and media resource specialists in schools who do try to teach how to find reliable sources, how to do a bibliography, make sure that you have things like that. But it's not a requirement as it is in other countries, as you mentioned, Kim.
Yeah, that's great. I love that because there's so much nonsense out there, and I think especially as AI is getting bigger, AI will pull from most everything.
Yeah.
So you really need to be able to figure out, where the source is that it's pulling
And that's
from.
actually something I'm on an ad hoc committee right now through the state association that we're putting together a summit, an AI summit for librarians that's specific to library work, because
Oh,
we have to
wow.
be able to understand what that looks like for our patrons and for our future. So kind of like an AI for librarians 101, and then we'll move on from there and continue those resources.
What does AI look like for the library's future? Maybe that's too general a question,
It
but
might
I'm
be.
trying to imagine the ramifications of that and if that is exclusively a bad thing or if there are ways in which the tools are helpful.
Right. And that's part of this whole training that we're trying to put together for our colleagues and myself
Yeah.
included. I don't really know. I don't know how to answer
Yeah.
that question. I'm still learning a
Yeah.
lot myself. But I think it's super important for us to understand. I mean, how many times on social media have seen something, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, wait a minute. But
Mhm.
I'm really skeptical because I also believe in finding the accurate information. So people who maybe aren't as skeptical or more gullible or just
Yeah.
want to believe what they're seeing
Aren't driven
aren't
to
driven
find those
to pull.
sources.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think confirmation bias goes a long way. And I even
Hmm.
like I try to have my spidey senses up too. And I've fallen for things a few times where it just seems like, oh, this it seems real. And quite frankly, I'd rather share it right now and get this point of view out there than check its credibility. I'm not proud that I've done that before, but I have. And the things that you are susceptible to when you're in a rush, even though there shouldn't ever be a rush to share a social media post. But sometimes I felt compelled to, and then
But
had to
that being
delete it because
part
I was
of
embarrassed.
us as libraries, not just having access, which is a huge part, making sure people have access to information, making sure people have access to reliable information, and then taking it a step further and making sure that people have access to understanding how to be discerning about the information that they're seeing.
So I'd imagine a huge part of that is making sure that as a public space, the library presents itself at least as being impartial, neutral, balanced, welcoming to all people of all walks of life, of all political persuasions. How much of that is on your mind on a daily or weekly basis to make sure the library is a welcoming space for everybody?
Yeah.
How important is that to you or your
That's
community?
that's kind of my jam. I That is so important to me. We are um libraries are probably one of the only public places that is really free and welcoming and open to everyone. I can't think of another publicly funded or public space that is. I might be wrong, or I may be just like my own bias of how awesome libraries are. I think there was some pushback by somebody said that to a local leader, and she said roads. And I have an aside on that for maybe a different part of a discussion, but we are welcoming. Libraries by nature are welcoming to all people. Doesn't matter what your age, philosophical, religious, political beliefs are, what educational or economic background you have. Everybody is welcome in the library and should have a right to the resources and information that is inside the library. And you said neutral, and it's just kind of like this really great idea to think about libraries as being neutral spaces. I think about it a lot because I always kind of, for two things, making sure that we have a balanced collection so that we're not just having books about certain, especially, political topics, I'll just say, or books, a few years ago, several years ago now, I had a community member say to me, I question what your politics are because you have books about this, but you also have books by like Ann Coulter and Mike Huckabee and Bill O'Reilly and Newt Gingrich. I'm like, of course we do. And it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the community.
Please question us. Yeah,
that's great.
Like, read all of the books.
I love that you're questioning that because we're here for everybody. And trying to be equitable to everybody. So I think it was probably about 5 years ago or so. I think it was after George Floyd was killed, that there was a community, it was still during COVID, and there was a community organization who had signs made that said, hate has no home here. And they were giving them out to different businesses and people. And they asked if the library would like one to put out on the lawn. And my heart and emotions and my non-neutral self as an individual said, absolutely, yes. Hate has no home here. And then like the library, this other like, or does it? If we're welcoming and open to all people, shouldn't we also be welcome and open? And then I just kind of had to stop that neutral thought and just say, nope, we are about love. We're about welcome. We're about accepting. And in that sense, hate has no home here. So libraries are neutral, and also we are creating an environment that's equitable, and that might not feel neutral to everybody.
Because we live in a time when those types of sentiments are ascribed to one political ideology. Only leftists and liberals believe things like sentiments like that, which is it totally negates the meaning of the message. But I'm reminded of that school teacher, I believe in Oregon, who was told that she had to take down "Everyone is welcome here" in her class as her classroom sign because it was complained about and deemed to be too woke. And I don't know, Amy, you don't have to answer this, but I'm wondering, hypothetically, if you were told you had to take down signage like that, what would you do? But maybe that's not a fair question to ask you.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I would really push back on that, but I feel like I have a little bit more leeway as a public librarian than a teacher in a school. I don't know. Yeah. I would probably stir things up a little bit with that one. I don't know. I wouldn't be apt to take that down.
Yeah.
But I think a public library is really different than a school library in a lot of ways. I used to think that public libraries had a lot more leeway, but in recent times, and I will say I'm here speaking as me, an individual, and not necessarily representing libraries. I'm a librarian. It's a big part of my life. It's what I do. But I have my own individual thoughts and non-neutral ways of thinking. I'm quite liberal. And so, yeah, I can't remember where I was going with that thought, but.
Just that you would push back.
All are
and
welcome.
You feel like you have more.
I feel like I would have to.
Maybe a school teacher. Yeah.
I feel like I would have to.
Yeah. Let's be honest. If you're upset about anybody saying that everyone's welcome here, maybe you might want to look a little bit deeper in yourself.
Which is why we're having these conversations, right? I feel like there's a way, if somebody were to say something about that, you could say, I wonder why you feel that way. I wonder I wonder about that. Tell me more
Like,
about why you're feeling this way, why this is important to you.
yeah.
It's important to me
What
that
are
all people are feeling welcome here. That's important to me. Why is it important to you that all people are not welcome here?
Right.
exactly like what is this person existing really doing to you? I mean, obviously, if you're being physically harmed, that's a problem. But,
Right.
like somebody just existing, why is that bothering you so much? Like that's a you problem. That's not a society problem.
And yet it has become such a problem in our society, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Kim mentioned it at the top of the show. We want to get real about book bans, and this
Yeah.
feels like the right time to talk
Yeah,
about that.
let's
So, why does the existence of a book trigger somebody? I hate the word trigger. Trigger is a trigger word that's overused. Why does it bother somebody so much to the point that they feel like that needs to be unavailable to everybody? And we're both curious what your experiences have been with book bans, either attempts at getting them passed or similar measures. Take it away, Amy. What's on your mind?
I have no personal I mean, I like have never had to go through a book challenge or a book ban. So there's two levels. The first part is the material is challenged, and then the ban is if it is removed. But we just kind of use this term book banning because it kind of cuts to the chase of the end result. And yeah, so there's a week set aside every year by the American Library Association that's called Banned Books Week. It's coming up in October.
5th to 11th.
5th to 11th, yep. And it's basically a time when we set aside to really talk about this issue. And the American Library Association puts together all kinds of data about how many challenges and why they've been challenged and if it's resulted in a banned book. 20 years ago, when I was putting up banned books displays, there were books like Bridge to Terabithia. And the reason was because two kids create this magical place in the woods and they have rituals and it's the occult. Okay. Or Harry Potter because it's wizardry and witchcraft and Satanism. Or even some classics like The Grapes of Wrath, which I have my own ideas about why people feel like it's banned, but the reasoning that they give is it takes the Lord's name in vain. There's a character who's a former minister whose initials are JC, which is the same as the initials of Jesus Christ. Blasphemy. And that shift has changed over the years to be books that are more sexually explicit. And yeah, there's probably more books being written that have those themes in them because writers are realizing that people want to read books or have more information about that topic. Oh, now,
I might add to that, not just realizing that that people want to read it, but more publishers are willing to take risks.
More
on
publishers are willing
material
to
that
take
would-
risks.
Yeah.
And publishing books by diverse authors, stories that are not just written by a certain type of person.
I think
And
about
yeah.
like even children's books, like the Antango Makes Three about two male penguins raising a chick, which penguins actually do that.
Yeah,
And
it's a true story. Yeah.
yeah, like this is nature, and
And nowhere in that book does it say this penguin has two daddies. It's not like that.
yeah, things like The Handmaid's Tale, stuff like that. People have tried to ban that book as well, which is a very current, almost blueprint of what is happening in our country. So it's curious that people don't want that book read.
Books with LGBTQ plus themes are I would say a majority of the book bans. I don't have that statistic in front of me. And also books that talk about racism and that are seen as the critical race theory, promoting critical race theory. Those are also, and the bans have increased exponentially since, from, I do have this number in front of me, from 2001 to 2020, the average number of books that were challenged was 273 a year. In 2023, there were 1,247 attempts on 4,240 unique titles, meaning no one's ever tried to get these books challenged or banned before.
Wow.
In 2024, there were 821 attempts on 2,452 unique titles. So it's increasing at an incredible rate over the past 3 years.
I think it's also worth noting where those challenges and pushback is coming from. I looked this up just out of curiosity before we met. This is per the American Library Association. They track every year, like you said, they're keeping track of the amount, but also, not everything is reported, but what they can get their hands on, it has stated that it's coming from groups and government entities like elected officials, board members, and administrators. And those groups account for initiating 72% of the demands to censor books in school and public libraries. So I think it's worth noting that this kind of brings me to local politics. We've seen people getting elected to school boards and then having power over things like what books are allowed in those schools. Something personally that when I was younger, you don't necessarily go to your, local election all amped up to vote for the school board members. But at this point, it's another thing that's just as important. I think being aware of who is running for local politics is really important because it affects our kids. It affects their access to books of all sorts. And obviously, there are groups that are working to insert themselves into organizations like this and put themselves into powerful positions that have sway. Also of note, the next largest amount group that had the largest amount was parents, but they only accounted for 16%. So there is an active push in this country to make book bans and book censorship happen. So if nothing else, everybody look into your local school board election.
and not just on a local level, on state levels. There's state legislation being passed that allows, and it's ambiguous language. It's not defined. It's actually criminalizing. So if a librarian in some states keeps these books on the shelves, they can then have charges brought against them, fines, and that to me is really bizarre. I was at a National Library Conference last year, and I heard a talk from a librarian in Idaho who that state passed a law. And I'm not going to get it 100% correct, but it was something along the lines of they couldn't have children's books and adult books in the same room. It had to be completely separate so that children wouldn't have access to adult content. So this library actually was so small. They were just one room. So they opted to remove their children's collection and only be an adult library. And they also, their community relied on them as being a rural library in Idaho for a lot of children's rec program in the summertime. The library ran that. And they couldn't do it inside. So the local indigenous people donated teepees for them to have outside of the space so that they could still run their summer rec programs. Children had to be accompanied to use the bathroom, but they could still be outside of the library to have that. So, I mean, it's not just the local level. We have, some states have also put into effect rules about having policies in place so that if somebody were to offer a challenge, that you would have a policy explaining how you collect books for your library and also having a process for the challenge. Most libraries have that anyway. And one of the things that the trustees of the library where I work, were really specific about was that you have to be a resident of this town to issue a challenge, because we're taxpayer funded. So they just felt like we're not gonna ever even entertain an outside group from another state trying to ban our books.
That's good. Speaking of the funding
Mhm.
for libraries, like you said, libraries are they're publicly funded through things like taxes. Um, Obviously, individual donations, donors. How much money, how much more money do libraries need?
Yeah.
Like because they provide so much. They are truly one example of socialism, and I can't for the life of me figure out why people are so against items like, libraries and roads and fire
Oh my
stations.
Because we're
gosh.
running a trade deficit with the library, Kim. The library is hemorrhaging us money.
So, oh gosh, there's so much there. I just want to say that you just mentioned libraries and roads, and I mentioned that earlier. I just want to say that I had this idea about, I heard a quote somewhere, and I held it for so long, and I use it all the time now because of this conversation that I had. That libraries are the only public place that's open to everyone. You could be a tourist, you could be, we're here where everybody can use the space. And they said also the roads, which is true. It's this whole idea of infrastructure, where roads are sort of that public, visible infrastructure, and libraries and museums, and this is the quote that I heard, are invisible infrastructure in our communities. And I love that. I love that we, as librarians and libraries, are actually, I don't love it because we should be visible infrastructure, but we hold up our communities, right? And so this idea that, a pothole is annoying and it does damage to your vehicle. So you want to get that fixed, or a bridge that's unsafe. Obviously, you're going to be pouring that money into those places so that everybody can be safe. But don't you also want to pour money into a space that's open to everyone and that everybody can use, and you want people to use it, right? Fund your police and fund your fire department and hope you never have to use it. Fund your library and hope everybody will use it. And
Yeah,
it's just not the mentality of every place. We
true.
are mostly taxpayer funded, and we do fundraising and get private donations, grants. Um, Librarians are pretty gifted grant writers most of the time out of need, um, and fundraisers. But so the library where I work is, I'm going to say right now, in a pretty healthy space as far as budget and goes. But oh gosh, two parts of that. And one is my neighboring library is funded in a very different way. They're a nonprofit incorporated library. And so their town does give them money, but it's more like an appropriation. They're a bigger town. They have a huge staff. They are doing amazing things in their community. And they asked to be level funded last year. And the town decided to defund that. I think $80,000 less than what they were asking for. And yeah, it just really is baffling to not value this organization and their community.
Yeah.
I'm
I
really
think
heartened to hear that your library is in good shape, Amy. If you could wave a magic wand and just allocate a little bit more money to one area, what's an area that your library or that a lot of libraries need the most help in? Is it programming? Is it books? Is it what would that be? Is it paying the bill? Is it utilities and
This
leases?
is gonna sound really self-serving, but it's funding your staff. Understaffed, qualified staff, and low-paid staff. I think that is the salaries, library salaries. I worked really hard to advocate for that here in my library. For myself, I have 2 part-time staff members that work with me. And and I still think this, not only should we be on parity with we're municipal libraries, so part of the town, we should be paid in parity with other town employees. But it seems like libraries are not seen in that way. So that's just something that I'm pretty passionate about.
That's
libraries
fair.
are seen sort of like these niceties where, people are willing to work for less and volunteer for their jobs and things like that. But it's really important, I think, that would be my magic wand, is to pay library workers their worth.
What do you find is that most important part of your job? I know that my guess, anyway, is probably the interaction with the community members. But what would you pinpoint it being? Would it be helping users, keeping the library in order, community outreach? Because there's so many different parts of what you do.
Mm-hmm. So all of that. Most important, I do think, is the interactions. And one of my favorite things is when someone comes in and says, "Hey, do we have this?" And and not just, "Hey, do you have this?" But that feeling that they belong and are connected. So I love that. And, I report to my trustees every month at our meeting, our statistics. How many items circulated of different types, how many people we counted walking through the doors, how many people attended programs, how many people used our public computers, those numbers that we can quantify. And what we can't always share, for a couple different reasons, it's hard to quantify that emotional side of libraries, or how we're making an impact in people's lives. And also, we value the privacy of our patrons. So we're not necessarily out there telling these great stories because it's personal and it's private and people trust us. But every once in a while, we get these really cool, and I've been here for a while now. So I just will say that years ago, there was a family who came here seasonally, and they had a kid who loved dinosaurs. And so every year when they came in the summertime, I'd say, "Oh, hey, here's the new dinosaur books." I don't remember this. But this year, the mom of that kid, and this is years and years later, happened to be in the library on the computers, and she overheard an interaction. I wasn't here that day, of one of the people that I work with and a child talking about dinosaur books. And she sent me an email remembering this story, remembering how important that was for her kid, to that I remembered them every year, and that I remembered that they liked dinosaurs, and pointed out what was new. And to let me know that her kid's a paleontologist and has his dream job working out west at a site. And it was like, okay, here's the payoff, right? Like 20 years later, or however many years later, it's 15 years, whatever it is. So I don't know.
Awesome.
I guess like that is those types you just never know, though. That's the thing. So I think that's kind of the mystery of libraries too, where we just do what we do and hope for the best. And every once in a while we get that nugget back to us.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things I had spoken with you initially about coming on the show is Macklin and I in our first episode had talked about different ways that people experience the world and get out of the world, and you had mentioned you were probably sitting there screaming at us like,
No,
reading books, come on guys.
no.
And when you said that, I was like, no, of course, like of course reading is a way that people escape their everyday lives, a way they learn so much, whether it's reading nonfiction or all it's just everything. You can do anything. If you can read, you can learn anything, you can discover anything. And when you said that to me, I was like, yep, totally missed the mark on that one.
You
Kim.
did not miss
Great
the
job.
mark, Kim and Macklin. Absolutely not, because that is what this podcast is all about, right? It's these individual viewpoints, and it's about having a conversation. Macklin mentioned going to college, being exposed. Yes. And you mentioned the military. Absolutely. And I was like reading stories, a small rural town where you're not exposed to and one of the whitest in my life, one of the whitest states in the country, reading a book, a picture book or a chapter book for a kid, or through your own personal development, helps you gain a perspective. There's a saying, it's really famous. It's windows and mirrors. Maybe you've heard it before. A book should be a window where you open it up and you can see a whole different world that's completely different than your own. And you can read a story. It could be fiction, it could be nonfiction, but fiction particularly usually speaks to your heart in a different way. It's a story. So maybe I've never experienced the death of a parent, but I can read about that and have empathy, and I've never been homeless, but I can read the story of a kid who lives in a homeless shelter, or whatever it is. And I think that's, and then the mirror. I want to read a book that reflects my experience. Maybe I am that kid who's experiencing homelessness and living in a homeless shelter, and I'm reading a book about this kid and they come out of it okay, and maybe there's hope for me. And that's why those stories that are being banned, like the LGBTQ stories, like those, a kid who sees themselves in a book, that's powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And there's some, to extend your metaphor, Amy, and possibly ruin it. Sometimes if you're looking through a window, you can see what's behind there, and then the lighting changes and you see your own reflection. And maybe some books do both, right? Some books expose you to
for
new
sure.
world or life, and then you realize you're learning a lot about yourself through those characters that at first were escapism. And then, like all good stories, they resonate with you personally.
For whatever reason. Yeah. And then they can be a bridge, right? Like a bridge to yourself and a bridge to better understanding to how, yeah, for sure.
You mentioned homelessness, and I've been hearing a lot about, and this is mostly anecdotal. It's not in my community, but I've seen it on the news. I've seen it in social media. I've read articles about people getting all huffy and puffy about unhoused people in the library. And like you alluded to before with that library in Idaho, it's always under the guise of protecting the children. And I was curious what your reaction is. First of all, what your experiences might be with unhoused people, or at least people that you perceive to be unhoused using the library, if that's caused any problems, or what your stance is on, again, the neutral space being available to everybody.
I love the way you just phrased that, by the way. People who, what did you just say? Appear to be unhoused, because there's no way. We don't do an intake process at the library. As I said before, everyone's welcome. So I don't remember what year it was, but it was pre-pandemic. A homeless shelter opened up just down the road from the library. It was at the time a seasonal homeless shelter, open from November to April. Only had 12 beds, and it was only open from like 4:30 in the afternoon until 8:30 in the morning. So from 8:30 to 4:30, the folks who were staying there had to find someplace else to go. And I got a little nervous because I was thinking, oh my goodness, we are a public space right down the road. I mean, we're in a small village right down. It's not far away from the public library. We're going to be inundated with people. Now this is going to be an issue that I'm going to have to deal with. And the biggest learning experience that I had out of that was that the people who I knew were guests at that shelter, who hung out at the library, I knew they were already people in my community. That there was someone who I used to work with in a restaurant. There's someone I went to high school with. There was someone who actually had done a job for us at the library. We'd hired them years ago, and their life circumstance changed. And there was also a woman who rented an apartment very close by. We waved to her and her kids every day, and they came to story time. And she had a very traumatic experience in her life. Her kids had to become wards of the state, and she became homeless. And so, I mean, they were already people that we knew all the time anyway. So that fear got taken out of that for me. Were there some issues? Sure. And I ended up asking to join the board of the shelter. I am on the board of that shelter now, and I love it so much. And we now have a year-round, 24-hour a day, 7-day a week shelter for 21 people, and it's a beautiful spot, and super proud of it. And it's a low barrier shelter, so we're opening some emergency family apartments. Actually, they just opened this last month.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
Congratulations.
So
That's
our
amazing.
relationship, but there's this guy named Ryan Dowd, who has made a whole living out of training libraries to have an empathetic approach to homelessness. He used to be the director of one of the largest shelters in Chicago, or just outside of Chicago, and knowing that there's a lot of different issues that come with being homeless sometimes, and so training librarians to have this approach of empathy when having to talk to people who are experiencing homeless or perceived to be experiencing homelessness. And I went to a lot of his trainings, and I actually get to go in person. You just have learned so much, but also this empathetic approach is applicable to every single person who comes in the library. So we're talking about equity. It's not just this person smells bad and now what do I do? Guess what? The lawyer down the street, also, I should talk to that person too then about their body odor. You know what I mean? Like that's just,
Yeah.
Well, like all forms of prejudice, it's wrong for the people that are being persecuted, period. And in addition to that, when prejudice is based on what you assume to be true about somebody, then it inevitably will hurt other people who do not fall into that category. Like the way transphobia is now affecting cisgender people who just present themselves a little differently. And so it's interesting to think about that equity that you're talking about, and just for it to be space for everyone.
Yeah. Yep. And I mean, we want to keep people safe. We're not a safe space in terms of that sort of like safe space kind of place. We're open to everyone. We can't guarantee that, but we want to keep it as safe and comfortable as possible for everybody. But
Yeah.
there was something else you just said. Oh, protecting children. I also wanted to go back to book bans and talk about how the fact that it's not just books, it's also programs. And the closest that I came to a ban or a challenge, which was actually a challenge where we had Drag Story Hour. We have hosted Drag Story Hour twice, and the first time was, I think, in 2018. And we publicized it and had 76 people here, which is huge for us. That's a big deal. It was so much fun. And so last year, we had an opportunity to host Drag Story Hour again, and we hadn't even advertised it yet. But the Drag Story Hour Facebook page had posted their schedule of events. We hadn't said anything yet. And I was getting phone calls and messages from folks. I get a personal Facebook message, so it must have been somebody who knew me personally or was able to find me, accusing me of being a pedophile. And, but, part of my heart was like, okay, that's couldn't be further from the truth, but also the people who are the drag queens are getting like 1,000 times worse than that. So, it's like I'm putting myself out there to host this. But I got a phone call one day, and this also kind of reminds me of what your goal is here in the podcast. I got a phone call from a couple. They had me on speakerphone, and they were really upset about Drag Story Hour. And so we talked it out. I think they just wanted to be heard. So I did a lot of listening. I did a little bit of correcting they had a lot of misinformation about what Drag Story Hour was. So I was able to, and plus we'd hosted one before successfully. So that was kind of nice to be able to fall back on. And by the end of the conversation, they said, okay, you're going to do what you're going to do anyway. We're not going to attend. Our kids, our grandkids, they're not going to go.
Thank you.
And but they also said, in the spirit of protecting children, which is why we're against Drag Story Hour, we want to let you know that there are people planning a protest. And I guess if we want to protect children, we also should be protecting them from this negative and perhaps harmfulness of a protest. So we were kind of able to get ahead of that too. Nobody ended up protesting at our library that day, but it was nice to get the heads up and to check in with the sheriff's department and make sure that everybody was feeling safe and comfortable coming in that day.
I feel like this is something I alluded to in our first episode, was that I feel like there's adults inserting themselves into other people's lives and decisions when they really should just be controlling their own households. Like, if you don't want your kid to be read to by somebody in drag, just don't go. Or, you know, if you don't want your kid to read a certain book, you don't need to take that book out of the library. Just tell your kid, I'm not comfortable with you reading it. And maybe that opens up a conversation as to why. And maybe you can talk to your kid about something that you obviously don't feel comfortable sitting with. You know, maybe you and your family member can grow together, and maybe your kid agrees with you, which is totally fine. But if your kid doesn't, that's a great conversation to be able to have with your own child. And I feel like I am constantly yelling at my kids all the time about this because they're younger. I'm always saying, worry about yourself. Like, that is a thing that comes out of my mouth all the time. So it's like, you know what? Worry about yourself. Worry about your family. Don't try and insert yourself into other people's lives. They are worrying about themselves. Why don't you worry about yourself? I feel like this is just a thing in all walks of life that needs to
Kim,
be
is it
said.
too late to rename our podcast Worry
Worry
About
about
Yourself?
Worry about yourself.
That would have been a great one. You know
Do
what?
like a colon.
Opportunity.
Realist Revolution. Worry about
Worry about
yourself.
yourself.
To that point, and I don't know any one of my colleagues in a school or in a public library who would ever come between a child and their parent when it came to if a parent said, I do not want my child reading this book. That said, we're not in local parentis. So if a child came in and checked out a book that a parent didn't want, we would check it out to them, not knowing, but it would be up to that parent to make that decision for their child, not up to us. But if a parent came to me and said, I don't want my child checking out this book, we would never stand between that.
Yeah, which is
Amy, I
great
don't
to
wanna-
hear.
Absolutely. And I don't want to force you to speak on behalf of drag queens or drag culture, but as someone who's successfully hosted Drag Story Hour, Drag Story Time a couple times, for the average person who might be against it, and who they perceive drag culture to be just like overly sexualized. And so what is fun about it? What is enjoyable about it? And what is explicitly not harmful about it? If you could just give a
So
little
I'm
peek
going to
behind the
start by
curtain to
saying that I have dressed up as a storyteller before. We did a fancy Nancy story time, and I had a hat and a dress and gloves and jewels. I don't dress like that in my normal life, but I was putting on a persona to read to kids. That's basically what it is. And it's this energy of fun, of being yourself, of the books that they were reading are books that we have on our shelves. It's not like they're bringing in special secret books that are only there for drag queens. and the books are about be who you are. And that is an empowering message for all kids, but it's a message that we've been getting from, my generation, Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, which, by the way, I mean, federal funding for that stuff is gone, but it's a message, be who you are and celebrate yourself and celebrate other people. And it's just this really joyful energy. And the drag queens that come here gave me a drag name. I'm Rita Book.
Oh, that's excellent.
I am not very good at answering to my drag name. Like they were like, "Oh, Rita, could you go get this?" I was like, "Oh, me? Oh!"
Get right on that.
Oh, that's fantastic. When this podcast comes out, Amy, do you want to be billed as Rita or Amy?
No, Amy is good. I don't answer to Rita clearly. I don't know, but I'm fine with that.
Okay.
You never know.
So, kind of piggybacking off of that question, I guess that in itself is kind of a misconception about something that happens in libraries. Are there any misconceptions about being a librarian or about book bans? And did you happen to have any misconceptions about the job kind of before you stepped into it that maybe those thoughts have changed since?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you a lonely spinster cat lady like all librarians are? Just curious.
No. Yeah, so alluded to, and my mom and her friends said that the stars aligned and that I could be a good librarian. And I said, I will never be that way. It's not because the librarians in my life were old ladies. And, and that is not to say they weren't lovely people. I have love in my heart for those memories that I have of going to my school library where these two older volunteers, they weren't even paid people. And this is the cutest aside, but it was Mrs. House and Mrs. Holmes. And Holmes was spelled Holmes, but my ears heard Mrs. House and Mrs. Holmes. And that is just like, maybe someday if I ever write a book, they will be the library stars because that's so sweet. Anyway, yeah, the old ladies wearing a cardigan and glasses. And yeah, that is just absolutely not it. I mean, I think certainly I do have colleagues and I wear glasses and sometimes a cardigan. But yeah. Who hasn't?
Exactly.
I don't know. Yeah, so that's stereotype, and also that we're quiet. Although I get shushed more than I shush people.
You rebel.
That's a fact. And yeah, I think that there's a lot of we're not a quiet library. We're pretty loud. We offer quiet spaces, but what else? Yeah, that stereotype, and also, I think if you see library leaders in our country, you're going to see that sort of stereotypical looking librarian. And you're also going to see like the person with the pink hair that's, spiked up, and just all kinds of different people who are librarians. And that's not to say that every librarian is like this liberal person heading out, championing, the freedom of speech and everything. That's not the case for everybody either, but the stereotypical woke librarian. No.
So if librarians can come from all walks of life and look like anybody, what would you say to someone listening to this podcast who never thought about becoming a librarian, but some of what you're talking about seems important to them and they like the idea of serving their community? What are a couple things they should do to explore if this is the right path for them?
Yeah, spend time in a library. And if you want to, there's all different ways of being a librarian. Like my experience is a small rural public library, but there are huge, libraries in other places like where you've lived, Declan, and just huge libraries that can fit 20 of my libraries inside of it. And to staff that place, you need people who are research librarians, like technology librarians, and all kinds of different types of. So I did not go to library school, but you can get your master's in library science and information science, and you should. If you really want to pursue a career in libraries, or at the very least, educate yourself in some way about what a library job is. Because I think that I got this job because I walked in one day and was kind of like, I think I could work here. And just one thing led to another and that happened. But I was also taking classes and working toward a better understanding of what it means to be a librarian. What I do, I manage a building. I do programming. I do a little bit of everything. I don't have somebody that I can call when the toilet's clogged. I mean, I can call a plumber, but there's not someone who's like on staff for me a maintenance person who works for the town that's specifically, so that's on me. Or if something breaks or whatever it is, that's part of my job as well. So that's not as attractive as everybody.
Roll up those sleeves.
Just check into what it actually is, because sitting around reading books is not what we do.
Right.
Reading books is not even in our job description. So
do you feel like when you watch the news, like what goes through your head when you see news articles or news videos about, relating to the library, relating to book bans, relating to, drag queens reading books to kids? Do you find it, my guess is you probably find it frustrating because you've had success with it. But I guess kind of what goes through your head when you see stuff like that? Do you feel like the media accurately portrays, being a librarian, what happens at the library?
Well, what goes through my head in general? There's a lot of anger and cynicism, for sure. And does the media portray libraries? I don't really know, because the media that I read is typically library supportive. I mean, when it's specific to libraries, but I guess book bans and misunderstanding of what we do does kind of spark a certain kind of I don't know if it's necessarily anger, but frustration that people don't fully understand the roles that libraries play in their communities. And yeah,
That's
I
fair.
also think that something else that I think about, because I've seen, like crime shows where a police officer will go into a library and the librarian spills everything. Oh yeah, they were sitting over there and they checked out this book and they did that. We don't do that. That is private information and you have to have a very specific search warrant or subpoena to get that information out of us. So that's another thing where I just think that people who use libraries in the state where I work anyway have a lot of privacy protection for their library use.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't have ever keyed into that.
Right. So that's sort of like we're a small community library. Somebody might hear me having a conversation with someone, that person leaves, and somebody else will come over and say, "Who was that you were just talking to?" I'm like, I can't tell you. Sorry.
Get a warrant.
Next time they're here, you can ask them to introduce themselves to you.
right.
I'm not going to.
There you go. Start a conversation.
It's an
Get to know your
awkward,
community
it's an
members.
awkward conversation to have, but I think it's also kind of an important one for people to know too. Or someone will call me and say, "Hey, I know this person's a patron of your library. Can you give me their phone number?" I'm like, "Nope."
Library
Definitely cannot do
client
that.
privileged information.
Yeah, we don't have like the HIPAA rules necessarily, but in our state anyway, library users' information is protected by state law, actually.
Wow.
That's very interesting.
yeah.
Kind of a segue off of that. Do you feel like there are any ways that your job is hindered or helped by like the government, I guess, like big federal government? Obviously funding is a huge topic.
We don't get federal funding for the most part, though. Like we might get some, like the Institute for Museum and Library Services, it's always on the chopping block, still is the Librarian of Congress who was fired. So those are kind of federal kind of things, but our funding for the most part is pretty local and not even, I mean, for us, not even state funding that much. We get some services through the state that might trickle through the State Department of Libraries through the federal government. So sometimes we feel a pinch if there's some conversation about that. And there's been a lot of conversation about that lately. So the funding part, I guess my concern, okay, so here's the concern about the funding. The Institute for Museum and Library Services, a while back, there was I think that Donald Trump said, no, we're not going to fund that anymore. And that had to be taken back. Like it was fought in court and that money had to, because Congress had already allocated the money to that. So that money, the Vermont allocation for that goes through the Department of Libraries. And we get some funding for, they do a interlibrary loan system. Now, if the state were to end the interlibrary loan system, we would not be able to fund that in any way for ourselves. So if we don't have a material, we're able to borrow it from another library, sometimes mostly in the state and even out of state. So in that way, we will feel some hurt. Because a lot of people, we're small, we can't buy every book that comes down or every type of material that comes out. So it's a great service that we're able to offer to people, but we can't do it if we don't have that state system in place to allow us to, the software that we can talk to each other and borrow books from other libraries. We have a courier service that delivers those books to us. If that system were to not be funded, there's no way we would be able to continue doing that.
Wow.
So things like that. There's a pinch for that type of thing.
Yeah. That's good insight.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you'd like to say? Thank you so much for your time,
Yeah,
Amy,
thank
and
you.
and speaking of insight, your insights and your expertise and your perspective. Any final thoughts or something we haven't covered or anything on your mind that you want to say?
Yeah. So I just wanted to recommend a few books.
Awesome. It's like we're part of the
If
book
your
club.
listeners, I know. Well, this could be a whole nother, but if your listeners are interested in learning more, this is our Constitution by Khizr Khan. It's written for kids, but I'm just thinking about Realist Revolution. Do you know what the Constitution says? This is written for sort of middle grade kids, but I recommend it to adults more than anyone else because it's broken down bit by bit and explains in very simple terms everything about our Constitution by someone who loves it. Khizr Khan is famous for introducing Hillary Clinton during the Democratic National Convention in 2016. He had a copy of the Constitution in his pocket, and he's a lawyer from originally Pakistan. And his son died serving his country, the United States, and so he's a Gold Star family. And he wrote this wonderful book about his love for the Constitution and why it's so important. So this is a great book. I just wanted to mention that. And then Democracy Awakening by Heather Cox Richardson. This is also another great one for grown-ups, but it's written very simply, easy to understand, and gives a history about not just where we are, but what kind of I don't think this would be her language, but what I'm going to say is sort of like manipulations were put in place to make us believe a certain way so that certain legislation laws could be changed and passed and sort of like pulling that thread to get to the bottom of how things happened. So 2 really good ones.
Awesome. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
I do also want to note, I know you spoke about it before, but there is the Banned Book Week, which is October 5th to 11th. If anybody's interested in that, you can check out info on that at bannedbooksweek.org. Also, if you're curious about information about libraries as well as banned books, the American Library Association's website is www.ala.org. So if anybody's curious, wants to kind of learn more, read more, go check them out.
Thanks for mentioning that, Kim.
Yeah. So with that, Amy, again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And
Thanks, Amy.
until our next episode, keep it real.
Thank you.